Hey, Jack. I figured because things change so fast, I figured I would just go ahead and just record a little bit of my work to try to show you what I do with agents and code. So I've got this project, let's see, called Ben, and it's a paste bin for agents, and it allows you to publish HTML pages as long as it's under 500K. And what I want to do is add a feature. So when I go to, let's say, p dot, some document, if that is dot md and it has an MD file, I want it to return the markdown version. So the way the ZenBin API works is API agent is basically you can just post a JSON document with HTML, and it can be either encoded with UTF-8 or base64, a title, the content type, and then an auth where you can make it private if you want. But I want to add an additional field here to include the markdown text, and maybe allow it to be base64 encoded too, just to keep from breaking spaces or whatever. So that's what I want to do. And then that way, if someone uploads a document also with their markdown, then you could just do .md or accept text markdown, and you get the markdown version of the document. So that's what we're going to do. And I've got a repo, github.com, twilson63 ZenBin. So just a standard GitHub repo, and I've downloaded it to this folder. And I'm going to just go ahead, and I've got OpenCode installed. So I'm going to go ahead and just call OpenCode. And then what you want to do is hit connect and then choose which provider you want. So if you already have a ChatGPT Plus account, you can use that, and that's pretty good. Or if you have a Claude account, you can use that and just go through that settings. Or if you want to use OpenCode Zen, that's pretty good too. And then I use Olama Cloud for some of the open source models, but Opus 4.6 is really good. GPT 5.3 Codex is really good. And GLM 5 is really good as well. So I open that up, and then what you want to do first is do init, and this looks for an agent's MD file. And if it finds it, then it is the best way for initially for it to understand your project, understand your repo. If it doesn't have one, it'll create one for you. You may not want to check it in depending on what project you're working on, but it's a good thing to do to kick off your project. And then what I do is I work through using the Socratic method, if you will, to build a planning document, right? It's the equivalent of writing a linear issue. Now you can hook this up to linear and read from linear and manage all that, but it does take up your context window, and this 7% up here is what you want to watch. As it's doing that, what I'll do is basically say, and I'm gonna use whisper flow to speak what I want my feature to be. And I'm gonna switch to plan mode. So I can hit tab and I can switch into plan mode. Build mode is gonna actually start writing to your repo. Plan mode is read only. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to define in my words what I want this new feature to do. I'm going to start the whisper flow now. Hey, OpenCode, I would like to create the ability to show the markdown text of a generated HTML page. And the best way I see to do it is to modify the API. So when a user posts a JSON defining the HTML page that they want to post, to allow them to include an MD property for Markdown. And if the encoding is set to UTF-8, then it would be plain text. But if the encoding is set to base 64, then it would also be base 64 like the HTML. And then from the output side, I would like when the user requests a URL of the page and they say .md, I would like to return in text Markdown in the browser the unencoded base 64 Markdown as the viewer. But if they don't put .md, I would like it to return the HTML. Another way they could request it is if they send an accept header and say they accept text/Markdown, then it would return Markdown as well. So that's really the genesis of the feature that I want to implement. Of course, we want to be able to run all of our tests, and then we want to be able to add tests for this feature. And what I would like you to do is to review this and put a plan together so that we can execute this, including success criteria. Success criteria is very important so that we know when the execution is done. And then the last thing I want to add to the plan is to always execute with sub-agents and do steps in parallel where you can. So I took all of that using WhisperFlow and pasted that into OpenCode. It's queued now, but when that init gets done, it will take this plan and it'll start to work on it. So here it's going to start to analyze that. And what it'll do is if there's anything that's unclear, because it understands the source code and understands what I'm asking, it will ask me questions. And sometimes when it asks questions, it'll just say, here's 10 questions. If it does that, if it's just too much for you, then I always say ask one at a time. And this one, it's broken them down because there's 3 questions. So the first one is if the page has Markdown but no HTML, it should return text Markdown. Response URL. Should the response URL include the Markdown URL in the API response when Markdown is provided? Yes, we want to include the Markdown URL. Should the raw endpoint also support the MD? No need for the raw endpoint to support that. Cool. So we got through those questions. We'll hit confirm. And let's see what kind of plan it creates. Now, one thing to consider, so as it's building this plan, you see your context windows at 14%. I always like to kick off my agents to code at a 0 context window. So what I do is once we've got the final plan put together, I ask to save that plan into some sort of file. I'm going to say, let's save. Let's see if we have the success criteria. That's the one. Yeah, we do have that. And we'll read that. That looks good. So I'm going to say save to, let's call this feat markdown.md. Let's just do markdown because that looks weird. And then I'm going to go off of plan mode to build mode so it can write that file. So we want to save this plan to the markdown file. And then we're going to create a new session and we're going to tell OpenCode to build. It saved it to feat markdown. So now we're just going to do /new, which gives us a new session. Our percent being used is 0. And so we're going to say read feat markdown MD and implement using sub agents in parallel where possible. Now, what will happen is instead of running everything in one single agent and waiting for each step to finish, which can take a while, this is going to create a to-do list, and hopefully it'll put it on the side, maybe not, but basically it's going to create a list of things to execute, and then anything it can do in parallel, it will spin these sub-agents off to do those in parallel. So let's see if it does that. Okay. So now let me read that, and I'll launch parallel sub-agents for task 1 and task 2 in phase 1. Yeah, it's got a good understanding of the code base, and here we go. So it's got our to-dos, and it's going to launch these in parallel. Basically, 2 agents now are working on those tasks in parallel. One agent's running task 1, and another agent is running task 2, which is pretty cool. They'll go through and build, and this process will run, for the most part, it depends on how complex the issue is, but it may run for 5 or 10 minutes. Now, another thing that's pretty cool, as you can kind of watch it go with OpenCode, is you can also go in any directory and say OpenCode serve, and this will fire up OpenCode's web server. And then you can go to your browser and go to localhost 4096, and that'll open up OpenCode in the web, and you can open up that project. And what's cool about this is, number one, you can access the project via the web. You can actually run Tailscale or whatever and access it. The other thing is you can also get a notification bell when stuff finishes. So let's see, let's go to the previous session. There we go. So we can see it running, or maybe it finished. Let's see. Okay. Let's see what session this is. So you can see it's taken up 14%. Yeah. Anyway, I use the terminal most of the time, but you definitely can give that a try. It should ding when it's done, but I'll pause now, and then when it cleans up, I'll unpause and show you what to do next. Okay, so we just finished all the tests and they're passing. The one thing that came up was like the .md wasn't supported in the web server framework, so I did /md to get the markdown. But anyway, those are kinds of things you might have to nudge, but you see all of our tasks are done and we verified everything. Now what we want to do is let's run a server and manually test. So let's start a server. Easier. Let's see if this will work. Okay. Cool. All right, so we can see this is running on port 4000. And we need to update our documentation. So that's one thing we need to do, but we can test really quick and just say, create a Friday blog post about too many cats and save to cats.markdown, then create HTML and post to localhost 4000 using localhost 4000 API agent instructions, and including the markdown. So basically, we want our agent to create markdown post and then post it to localhost and give us a URL, and it should return HTML, but then also return markdown. So basically, we're just testing to make sure our feature or fix works, and then we'll go through and check out the documentation, make sure it's up to date, then we'll create a branch, pull request, etc. Now, one thing, if you want to work on multiple things at the same time, is use Git work trees. So you can use a Git work tree and then copy your config information over and then run OpenCode to work on one thing, and then do another Git work tree and copy your config information and get it to work on another. The only problem with Hyperbeam is because it shares things, it may be problematic, so you may not be able to work on multiple bugs at once with Hyperbeam. But unless you can get give the Genesis WASM server different ports per work tree, right? Say, and the same with the Hyperbeam instance, it needs to run on different ports, just like running the test. Okay, cool. We got markdown URL. Let's check that out. Come on. What about, oh, on port 4000. Cool. So that worked. And then if we just do that, we get our website. Cool. So that appears to be working. We just need to update the documentation. So we'll say, go back to plan mode. We need to update the README documentation and the API agent markdown documentation, as well as the front page of the web service, the Zenbin landing page. Make sure we update that information with this new markdown property feature. Let's create a plan and make sure we have success criteria to measure to know that it's complete. So again, I have it write a plan for everything and then save that plan to a file and then tell the agent to implement the plan. Sometimes I change agents. One thing I've been liking lately is to have maybe ChatGPT write the plan, then Opus execute the plan, and then ChatGPT do a review of the implementation, like a code review. And just changing the models prevents this same pair of eyes. It's like a second pair of eyes feature. If you give a different model with new context the opportunity to review, it may find different things or look at things differently. Versus if you tell it this to implement the code and then tell it to review, it's already got the context of what it did. So of course it's going to say, hey, everything is fine, or it all looks good, because it wrote the implementation just like a developer would. So anyway, that's a gist of what I do and how I do that with OpenCode. I kind of write code these days with OpenCode. So when this finishes, we'll rinse and repeat and create doc-1.md or something like that, and then create a new session and have it read that and go from there. And then eventually commit it to GitHub and get it pushed out to production.